Imagine, in the middle of the night, when you are sound asleep, someone breaks into your bedroom with a handgun and a sword and kills your entire family, including children. Sounds like a dreadful nightmare, right? But the nightmare got us real for the Caffey family, as the horrific events of this brutal family slaughter are. This is the story of a sociopathic 16-year-old girl with an antisocial personality disorder who plotted the murder of her family with her teenage lover and later went on to have sex with her accomplice while her house burned down to ashes. The crime was so unimaginable and ugly that it shook the whole nation, and every parent wanted to know what would make their children commit such a cruel act of violence. Came from a conservative and protective family. She had two little brothers, Matthew Caffey, 13 years old, and Tyler Caffey, 8 years old. Her family began homeschooling her when she was 13 after her family moved from Alba, Texas to Celeste, Texas, so that they could be closer to a conservative Baptist church where her parents worked as ministers while she sang in the choir. Her beautiful voice would sometimes move her audience and the church to tears. But for Erin, homeschooling was like an isolated existence for an otherwise social girl. She reportedly didn't have many friends, and her life was largely confined to the church and her parents' house, which she later tried to burn down. When Erin turned 16 in July 2007, she was allowed to work at the local sauna. One of her co-workers observed that she was so sheltered it was like she was seeing the world for the first time. And that was where she met her soon-to-be boyfriend, 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson. He was a high school senior and known as hot-tempered, but he had never been arrested previously and had no serious discipline problems at school. This was the first pivotal moment in her life. The kind and sweet Erin that her family and friends had known and loved so much slowly went away. Nobody knew it yet, but at that moment all their lives were changed forever. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. However, Erin's parents did not approve of Charlie. He had given them an impression of a rude, arrogant, and disrespectful 18-year-old. Although it's up for debate that these traits might have been more of Erin rather than Charlie. As time went on, Erin and Charlie's relationship grew intense and more passionate. They didn't care what anybody else thought in regards to their relationship. They started spending more and more time together. It was almost like they became part of each other. In fact, they had only been dating for a few months when Charlie presented Erin with his grandmother's engagement ring. You know how it is to be young and in love. Your brain gets foggy. All common sense goes out of the window, and sometimes it's hard to see what is so clear to everyone else around you. As Erin began to shut off everyone from her life except Charlie, secluded herself from the rest of the church, and started to engage in inappropriate PDA, her parents also began picking these changes in her behavior. This absolutely infuriated Terry and Penny, and from then on, the cafes limited Erin's time with Charlie to once a week in their home and under their watch. Charlie had to leave home by 9 p.m. and Erin could use her cell phone to talk to him only until 10 p.m. These restrictions made Erin very furious, and she planned to run away with Charlie. In February, Erin was grounded for talking to Charlie without permission and got her keys and phone taken away. It all became clear to her parents that this relationship will continue to cause problems as long as it will go on. Penny put her foot down and asked Erin to stop seeing Charlie. Allegedly, this was the moment when she decided that drastic steps were needed to be taken so that she and Charlie could finally be together with nobody around to disrupt them. Maybe this was the moment when seeds of a highly dangerous idea had taken in Erin's mind, and her parents were unaware of all these barbaric ideas that were making a home in Erin's consciousness. Terry and Penny thought that with the imposition of grounding restrictions and ending their relationship, they had fulfilled their parental responsibilities. But they had no idea they were totally ignoring Erin's increasing obsessive antisocial behavior and what was it going to lead to. And so came the early morning of March 1st, 2008, when the Caffey family could not see the sunrise. It was 2 a.m. in the morning when a loud bang of their bedroom door opening woke up Terry and Penny. I'd wait to the sound of our door slamming up against the wall. The two little kids, Matthew and Tyler, were asleep in the rooms upstairs. The two intruders burst into the couple's bedroom and opened fire, shooting them several times. Bullets showered the bedroom, and before Terry and Penny could make out what was happening, they were shot multiple times on their bodies. It was a horror that they had not even thought of in their lives. Your father, Terry, heard your mother say to Charlie, "Where's Terry?" To which Charlie replied, quote, "Terry is dead. Quit fighting this and it will go quick." And then he heard Charlie tell Penny, "Die bitch, die." To save Penny from the shots, Terry jumped on her and took 2 bullets straight on his face. Not only did they break in shooting hysterically, but they also came in carrying 2 samurai-style swords. After Terry took blows on his face, he flung out of the bed and the intruder shot Penny several times more. Then they shot Terry 3 more times in the back and once in the back of the leg. All in all, Terry took 11 shots on his body. Terry could not feel the right side of his body, and even when he tried to speak, nothing came out of his mouth. Then one of the killers took a sword and stabbed Penny in the neck, nearly decapitating her. He put the sword that he had to her throat and he rammed it in. Terry began to panic as he thought of his children who were asleep, and he knew that they would wake up. He was trying to get up when he heard Matthew cry out, "No, Charlie, no, why are you doing this?" It was Aaron's boyfriend, Charlie, with his friend, who was later identified as Charles Wade, who was trying to murder the whole family. When Terry heard Charlie's name mentioned by Matthew, he knew who was in his house and why he was there. Then Terry heard a gunshot. He tried to get up, but as the blood rushed to his head, he collapsed. It was Matthew who had been shot dead. All this while, Tyler rushed and hid in the closet, but Wade found him hiding, and both of them took turns stabbing Tyler to death. Once Charlie and Wade were sure they had killed everybody, they took out their pocket lighters, set the house on fire, and fled the scene. It was a frightful sight of a family being slaughtered and a house burning down to its ashes. As Charlie and Wade escaped, they expected all of the family members to die, but Terry Cafe miraculously managed to survive. "I knew I wasn't able to get upstairs because the flames were just pushing me back into the bedroom, so I crawled on the bed and found Penny. She was already gone. I finally managed to crawl out our bathroom window and then dragged myself away from the house," said Terry. Until Terry was able to crawl 300 yards through the woods to neighbor Tommy Gaston's house. When Gaston called 911, the operator asked him where Terry was bleeding. "Where isn't he bleeding from? It's a miracle he's here at all." Terry was taken to East Texas Medical Center in Tyler and admitted to the critical care unit. In the ambulance, he named his daughter's boyfriend Charlie Wilkinson as the killer. In the rural communities as small as Alba, there are no strangers. Upon hearing Charlie's name, Chief Deputy Commissioner Kurt Fisher realized that Charlie was a friend of his son. The commissioner had gone fishing and four-wheeling with Charlie many times before. Fisher told the other detectives that he had spotted Charlie's car parked outside Matthew Wade's trailer. Matthew Wade was the brother of Charlie's accomplice, Charles Wade. He was a few years older than Charlie, and he and Matthew sometimes drank at his trailer. The detectives immediately rushed off to Matthew Wade's trailer. As they pulled outside the trailer, a teenager whom Fisher did not recognize ruggedly came to the door. He was unsure if Charlie had spent the night in the trailer or not, but he agreed to let the officers in. Fisher walked from room to room, stepping over piles of dirty laundry and empty beer cans. Wade and his girlfriend were woken up by the officers. Fisher told them he needed to talk to Charlie Wilkinson. As Fisher continued down the hall, he saw that a blanket covered the empty door frame of one bedroom. Pulling the blanket back, he shone his flashlight inside. He could see Charlie lying on a mattress awake, wearing only blue jeans, and a semi-automatic handgun lay on the floor beside him. As he thought Charlie might reach for the gun, Fisher asked him to show him his hands, led Charlie outside in handcuffs, and sat him on the porch. The officer told Charlie that Caffey's family had been attacked and killed earlier that morning, to which Charlie hung his head and kept quiet. "Were you involved in this?" Fisher asked. "No, sir, I got drunk last night and passed out," Charlie said, shaking his head. Deputy Amick went inside the trailer to get Charlie a shirt and his cowboy boots. As Amick carried them out to the porch, he noticed that they were spattered with blood. The officers put Charlie in the back of the squad car, where he stared out the window in silence as they drove through the woods towards Emory in the pre-dawn gloom. After Charlie was brought to the county jail, the officers obtained a search warrant from the justice of the peace and returned to the trailer to collect any evidence that might tie Charlie to the crime scene. They discovered a purse with Aaron's driver's license as they went ahead and tore away piles of clutter. They saw a pile of blonde hair peeking out from the heap. Assuming that they had found a doll, they grabbed the hair into their shock. It was a teenage girl lying in a fetal position facing away from the officer. The officer demanded that she show her hands and stand up. He recognized from the driver's license that it was Aaron Cafe. Aaron immediately began asking where she was, and she didn't remember how she got there. She claimed that she had been drugged the night before and didn't remember any details. The only memory she had was that of a fire, two men in black with swords, and drinking something. After the drink, she couldn't remember anything. Memories of earlier in the night were also blurry. The police officers initially felt sorry for Erin and praised her strength. However, as the story unravels, it would come to the light that this was not the case. Erin was taken into custody and sent for a physical examination. As there was no trace of drugs in her blood and there was no sign of smoke inhalation, it was soon clarified that Erin had lied about what happened to her that night. Although Erin's father believed that Charlie did this to seek revenge from the Caffey family because the Caffeys had restricted Erin from seeing him, Charlie's version of the story differed from his. Charlie claimed that he did this for love rather than rage. He did not do it for revenge. He did it because Erin asked him to. Charlie soon blurted out his accomplices' names. Charles Wade and his girlfriend Bobby Johnson. They were promised $2,000 by Erin. In less than 24 hours, all four suspects, Charlie Wilkinson, Charles Wade, and Erin Caffey and Wade's girlfriend Bobby Johnson, were in police custody, and they were all talking. According to the boys, Charlie, Erin, and Wade were driven to Caffey's home by Bobby. They wandered around the house for a long time before they were scared away by the house's dog, who immediately started barking loudly. Erin called Charlie repeatedly, forcing him to come back and kill his parents. She said she would bring the dog inside so it wouldn't wake anyone up. But as the boys were still hesitant, Erin snuck out with them in her pajamas. Bobby drove them to a cemetery where they sat for an hour and planned the murder of the Caffey family. Charlie said that he tried to convince Erin to run with him instead, but she insisted that she wanted them permanently gone. And not just her parents. She wanted her little brothers killed too, as she said they were annoying. They drove back to the house again. This time, Erin took care of the dog and sat in the car with Bobby outside the house while her friends carried out the murder of her family inside. Once Erin had the confirmation that her parents were gone, she gave Bobby and Wade the combination to the lockbox in which the money was kept. They also took $400 from Terry and Penny's wallets. As the plan was being executed, Erin's words were, "Holy shit, that was awesome," and she celebrated the death of her family by sleeping with their killer the same night. Erin was under arrest but denied plotting the murder. She couldn't be questioned immediately as she was a minor and she didn't agree to speak with investigators. So she wrote a statement claiming that she was forced by her boyfriend into this act and she was just going along with it. Erin was sent to a juvenile detention center where she was held on murder charges. On January 2, 2009, she was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 25 years for capital murder. Charlie and Wade were sentenced to life imprisonment without any possibility for parole. Bobby, on the other hand, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Terry Caffey, the only member of the Caffey family who survived that night, except for Erin, still visits his daughter's jail and fights for her early release. To this date, he cannot believe that his daughter could do such a thing. Maybe because during those jail visits, Erin has told him a different story of her innocence. Terry later went on to remarry and now has 1 more biological child and 3 adopted children. He even wrote a book on the horrors of that night. It's called The Terror by Night, The True Story. Erin's case is no less than an alarm for mental health issues among teenagers, and this case goes to the extremes of it. Erin showed extreme signs of antisocial personality disorder during all those years of her relationship with Charlie. But her parents didn't seem to notice the severity of symptoms. What do you guys think? Was this a case of bad parenting? A teenage romance gone wrong? Or a sociopath manipulating her boyfriend for her evil desires? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered of being murdered by someone you love deeply? I hope not, but there have been some unfortunate people who suffered that fate. Today, we will be looking at how a sweet and passionate love story turned into a tale of tragic homicide. Emma Jane Walker was a 14-year-old high school student. She was a delightful young lady with a very close-knit family and friends who loved her to death. Emma got admission into the Knoxville Central High School, Tennessee, just 2 years before her death. Her friends described her as having a bubbly and fun personality. She was the only one in her junior year to get selected for the Central High cheerleading team. She had a bright future and she wanted to become a nurse. Amidst her charismatic personality, Emma craved love. Therefore, while cheerleading, she caught the attention of William Riley Gall. William was 2 years older than Emma and was a star football player of his team. At that time, Riley was already dating a girl, but broke up with her to be with Emma. It was a perfect love story, a popular football player and a cheerleader. They both seemed to be head over heels in love with one another. Emma's friends described Riley as a bit shy but extremely possessive about her. Their love story made Central High's headline as Emma kept posting on social media how happy she was with her boyfriend. Emma's parents also described Riley as a very sweet and generous guy who always made their daughter laugh. Despite their approval of Riley, they kept a close check on their daughter's phone so the couple wouldn't cross any limits. Fast forward a few months later, Riley's behavior started changing immensely as he started controlling whatever Emma did. Her parents saw this toxicity in their daughter's relationship and decided to step in and take her phone away. This did not stop Emma from contacting Riley as he gave her an iPod Touch with which she would text her boyfriend secretly. 2 years had passed and Emma was 16 years old now. Her relationship with Riley kept getting worse day by day. Riley would text her things like, "You are dead to me and I won't ever see your face again. You know that I love you." It was getting harder for the Walkers to see their daughter suffering because of her boyfriend. Riley's mom, Jill Walker, asked Riley to stay away from her daughter in order to protect her. Finally, in the fall of 2016, Emma broke up with her player boyfriend. Around the time, Riley had graduated high school and had been a junior in Maryville College, which was only 30 minutes away from Emma's house. This was a deal-breaker for Riley as he tried to take his own life by swallowing Vicodin pills in his dorm room. His friend witnessed his behavior and how much he was obsessed with Emma. Meanwhile, Emma's life started getting better. She started spending quality time with her family and friends and also realized that she deserved better. Things started getting normal for the Walker family as the breakup proved to be healthy for their daughter. It was a normal Saturday and Emma was at a friend's house celebrating their victory in the annual football game. Around midnight, Emma started receiving mysterious texts. The text asked her to come outside alone or they will kill someone she loved deeply. She told her friend Zach about these anonymous messages and he suspected that it would probably be Riley trying to get back together with Emma. Terrified by the text, Emma and Zach went out and found a man lying face down near a ditch. To their surprise, it was Riley. He told Emma and Zach that he had been kidnapped and did not remember anything as he was unconscious. Nobody believed him and said that he was doing this just to get sympathy from Emma. A day or two had passed when Emma had been home alone and saw a man in a black hoodie standing outside her window. "I hate you, but I need you right now." He got a text from Riley that he was speeding over to her house to save her. Jill Walker came back to check up on her daughter and found Riley sitting in her front yard. She got furious and asked Riley to leave her property immediately. Emma told her mom the entire situation and asked her to be gentle with Riley as he was only there to help her. Emma's friends again suspected that the mysterious man who was stalking her was none other than Riley himself. Following the days after this incident, Emma's parents never left her side as they were scared for her daughter. By Sunday night, everything had gotten back to normal. November 21st, 2016. It was a normal Monday morning when Jill Walker went into her daughter's room to wake her up for school. To her surprise, her daughter had no pulse. She freaked out and called 911 immediately. The ambulance came and rushed Emma to the nearest hospital, but it was too late. Emma was already dead. The hospital observed that she had been killed due to gunshots. The demise of a 16-year-old girl's death with a notably bright future made headlines throughout Tennessee. The investigations began as the Walkers and the entire Central High was mourning the loss of Emma Walker. Many condolences came in, including Emma's ex-boyfriend. He started posting her photos on social media, claiming how much he misses her and hopes that she would be in a better place. During the investigation, the police found 2 bullet holes outside Emma's room. The doctors told the police that Emma had been shot twice and 1 bullet had hit her ear, killing her instantly with the second one hitting her pillowcase. The police started interviewing all the suspects and one name kept coming up: William Riley Gall. Emma's parents and friends testified that Riley had been trying to scare Emma to get back with him. Riley's college roommate made a statement that the night before Emma's death, Riley had asked him how to remove fingerprints from a gun. This intrigued the police and they started investigating more about the 18-year-old college student. Riley had shared a secret with his friends that after he got kidnapped, he had taken a gun from his grandfather in order to protect himself. This made suspicions grow on him excessively. When the police checked out the records, it came out that Riley's grandfather had reported about his gun being stolen. There was no room for confusion anymore. Noah and Alex were Riley's best friends. They were also helping the police solving Emma's murder. The police asked the pair to secretly record Riley and trying him to confess murdering Emma. They both agreed and asked Riley questions about the homicide. Riley asked his best friends if they would help him get rid of the gun in the Tennessee River as he could go to jail because of that. It was all clear at this point that Riley was the one who murdered his ex-girlfriend. The police took him into custody and asked him questions regarding the murder. He kept denying it, yet his phone location showed otherwise. It was seen that Riley was outside Emma's house the night she got killed. It was 3 a.m. in the morning when Riley was seen going back to Maryville College. Along with that, the police also found black clothing and shoes in Riley's car, making it clear that it was him who was stalking Emma. The proofs were crystal clear, and 48 hours after Emma was murdered, Riley was in handcuffs. The trial of Riley Gall began, and it was argued that Riley was Emma's hero and it was just his clumsy act to scare Emma off so she would come back together with him. His intentions were never to kill her. This verdict did not come through, and eventually the jury made its final decision. William Riley Gall was charged with the offense of first-degree murder as well as talking, theft, and being in possession of a firearm. He was sentenced to prison for a lifetime with a maximum of 52 years to be even considered for parole. This has been a terrible case of a depressingly common type of homicide. Such cases are always hard to decipher whether they are a reality or not. It was a tale of love at first sight, but what happened at the end will leave you wondering what the motives of her actions were and why she sought so much pleasure in the tragedy of her lover. This is a story of love gone bad. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky to Lisa Carter and Jay Poston. He had 3 younger sisters, Catherine and Elizabeth Carter. He attended the International School Manila in Philippines and the International School of Geneva in Switzerland during high school. He later attended Indiana University where he triple majored in history, geography, and political science, then went to law school at the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University in Highland Heights. Poston was a promising American attorney, was working as an attorney in Cincinnati, Ohio, and 28 years of age when he had met his supposed lover. While his lover, Shana Michelle Ubors, was born on April 8, 1991 in Lexington, Kentucky, United States, she was 19 years old when they had met. Ubors was a student at the University of Kentucky, Lexington. She was majoring in psychology. In 2011, Shana Ubors and Ryan Poston met on Meta, formerly known as Facebook. Poston had stumbled on a beautiful profile picture of Ubers on his mobile phone while surfing the social site. He was intrigued by the beauty of Ubers, which prompted him to further check her profile. Poston was sure he wanted to be more than a friend to the person he had seen in the picture. He sent her a friend request. The duo began talking and things were going on smoothly with their conversation. During their talking stages, there were arguments, but that didn't put off the relationship as the duo were so attached to one another. The reality between the duo differed from what it appeared to the public. However, the two shared an on-again, off-again romance for 18 months, often arguing over trivial matters. Poston and Ubers' on-off relationship was noticed by friends of the duo, which helped in figuring out what was going on. What transpired when things got out of hand? Something bizarre happened which turned a supposed beautiful evening into a mourning evening. During the recount, viewers before the major incident that happened in the story, she claimed on October 12, 2012, she was in the condo of her lover ex-lover Poston. The duo was reported to have ended the relationship between them before the ever-mentioned date. On the said date, her ex-lover had a date with Miss Ohio USA 2012 Audrey Ball that evening. Ubors at some point had claimed her relationship with Poston was abusive, and that was one of the main reasons the relationship with him didn't work out. On the evening Poston was to meet with Miss Ohio USA 2012 for a date, things went sour with him and Ubors, his ex-girlfriend. In the pace of the evening, Ubers claimed Poston was calling her mother stupid and crazy. She further said he called her unstable and deranged, which triggered her and she decided to leave his condo. But things didn't go as planned as it came for her as she approached the exit of the condo. Ubers said Poston grabbed onto her body, onto her person, with both hands. She claimed he had picked her up from an awkward angle in the house and threw her from the doorway of his bedroom into the other room to the edge of the short sofa. In the ensuing struggle, Ubers said Poston fell on her and pinned her against a footstool, thereby grabbing her hair and screaming into her left ear. She thought he was going to snap her neck because of the way he was jerking her head around. Ubers claimed all of his weight was on her at this point and there was no way for her to escape for her life. In a further recount by Ubers, she claimed Poston had pushed her against the TV in his room. But during the investigation of the crime scene, the TV set was in a perfect condition, which contradicted her story. To get herself free from the pinning weight Poston had on her, she claimed to have punched him with her right arm. And when she did, it knocked the glasses off his face. She could get herself free, and the duo wrestled standing up. Ubers during her trial recount said, before things got messy, Poston was standing over her and grabbed the gun that was sitting on the table and pointing it at her and saying, "I could just kill you right now and get away with it. Nobody would even know," she said. She was shocked and afraid at the same time. Despite Poston's words, he didn't shoot. Instead, he set the gun back on the table and continued to yell hurtful things at her. She was losing it, and to defend herself against Poston, she shot him 6 times. But what the investigator discovered was something that would leave you wondering what could have transpired between the two that evening. After Uberus had shot her ex-lover 6 times, she called the police immediately to report what had happened. She dialed 911 and told them she shot him in self-defense. After the initial report, she continued to tell the dispatcher that because he was twitching and I knew he was going to die anyway and he was making funny noises, I shot him a couple more times. Uber said he was twitching so badly and I didn't want to watch him lay there and twitch. Police on the crime scene searched and recorded all information that could help with their investigation in the case. However, what Ubers had told the investigators was contradicting to everything that was in the condo of Poston, which led the police to suspect Ubers murdered Poston in cold blood. Police brought Ubers to the police station for further questioning and interrogation. Officer Dave Fornash was the officer who interrogated her. She initially stated that she wanted an attorney but began to share details of the murder with him. During an interview with police, she said she knew Poston would die or be seriously injured. This was referred to according to a clip that emerged from her trial. Officer Fornash stated Ubers appeared unremorseful during her recount of the ugly incident and made several morbid jokes about the murder, including telling officers, "I shot him right there," pointing to her nose. "I gave him the nose job which he had always wanted." After the back and forth between the interrogator and Hubert, he left the interrogation room and Hubert's behavior got stranger at this point as she danced around the room, singing aloud and snapping her fingers as she had just won a huge sum of the money from a lottery ticket. With all of Hubert's actions and what she had recounted, it was evident that she had an active motive for killing Poston, which the police couldn't find out. However, most people who had weighed in on this case believes Ubers had intentionally killed her ex-boyfriend for letting go of her and having a date with the Miss Ohio USA. In April 2015, Ubers claimed Poston was violent toward her while the prosecution countered all she had to say with evidence that what she was saying was the opposite of what had happened. At some point, the prosecutor said that she was obsessed with the attorney as the investigation revealed she was sending about 50 to 100 texts per day, sometimes to her ex-boyfriend. During the back and forth, the jury concluded and sentenced her to 40 years in prison for Poston's murder. She appealed and her sentence was overturned the following year because it was revealed that a convicted felon had served on the jury, which is not allowed by Kentucky law. While she was still in prison awaiting a conclusion to the case, Ubers was granted a second trial. Nivens and other former cellmates testified about her behavior behind bars and what she allegedly told them about Poston and his killing. One inmate, Cecily Miller, discusses Huber's behavior after being arrested and how she never expressed remorse about killing her boyfriend. During Shauna Huber's second trial in 2018, texts the then 21-year-old sent to her friends before she murdered Ryan Poston seemed to display an escalation in violent ideation, one that, by all appearances, went virtually unnoticed at the time. The prosecution brought forward witnesses who testified that Ubers sent them a text message joking that she wanted to accidentally shoot Poston at a gun range. Another witness testified that she had heard Ubers telling a coworker that she was going to kill her boyfriend. Some texts read, "When I go to the shooting range with Ryan tonight, I want to turn around, shoot and kill him and play like it's an accident. Read the text," which was received by Uber's friend Christy Euler. Another one described Uber's growing rage at Poston, with Uber stating her belief in a thin line between love and hate and that her love for Poston had turned into hate. Toward the end of their relationship, Shauna Ubers had conducted many internet searches for a woman which her ex-boyfriend had friend on Facebook in January 2012 named Audrey Bolt, who was named Miss Ohio USA the same year, eventually agreed to meet up for a date with Poston, having ended things with Hubert at that time. According to the Cincinnati Enquirer, Hubert also added Bolt on Facebook, presumably to access more details about her. In an interview with a local Kentucky station via CBS, Bolt recalled her impression of Poston. She recalled, Poston, it seemed, was also as excited and enthusiastic about the proposed date, but he reportedly told his stepfather Peter Carter that he was struggling over how to tell the Ubers about it, effectively putting the final nail in the coffin to their year-and-a-half-long relationship. I told him to make sure that he was kind to Shauna and that he told her honestly what was going on, said Carter at Uber's second trial in 2018 per CBS, before recounting how Poston had also expressed worry that Ubers would ultimately sabotage it, describing her as always around. Tragically, Poston would be murdered by Ubers only hours before he was due to meet Bolt in person. A psychologist testified that she suffered from PTSD and borderline personality disorder and claimed the emotional abuse and distress caused by Poston led to her violent act of murder. Ubers was convicted of murder again in 2018. This time in August 28, 2018, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2032. In her most recent mugshot taken in 2019, she is my life. What do you think about this cold case? Let me have your thoughts or opinions in the comments section. We've all heard of Jill and true crime stories, but what if I told you that there's one case that is genuinely the worst incident of homicide in post-war Japan? While many true crime stories can be darkly fascinating, this one crosses that boundary by miles. The case of Junko Furuta is different. This is one of the few cases that will shake you to your bones and make you boil with rage from start to end. It's not fascinating, it's just horrible. The only mystery here is about how human beings can be so unimaginably cruel and how a judicial system can fail an innocent girl so badly after everything she went through. Let's get right into it then. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student living in the Saitama Prefecture in Japan in 1988. She was smart, ambitious, and generally well-liked by everybody around her. Her grades were great. She stayed away from alcohol and drugs, and she was working at a plastic molding factory in her free time to save up for a trip that she planned on taking after graduation. She had also accepted a job that she planned to take on after she graduated. Needless to say that she had a bright future ahead. Unfortunately for her, she went to school with some juvenile delinquents that were all low-ranking Yakuza members: Hiroshi Miyano, Jigura, Shinji Minato, and Yusuji Watanabe. Miyano had a history of committing crimes and apparently had been getting into trouble since elementary school. Reportedly, Miyano had a crush on her and had even confessed his feelings to her before, but she rejected him because she wanted to focus on her studies. Miyano's horrible reputation and his connections to the Yakuza scared most people quite a lot, but Furuta had the courage to outrightly tell him no. On November 25, 1988, Miyano and Minato were wandering around to find a victim to kidnap and rape. It just so happened that Furuta was riding back home around 8:30 p.m. after her shift at the job. Under Miyano's orders, Minato kicked Furuta off her bike and ran away from the scene. Miyano then approached her and pretended to help her out to try and get her to trust him. Unfortunately, she did. Miyano led Furuta to an old warehouse and immediately began threatening to kill her if she did not listen to him. She tried to fight back, but he managed to overpower her, after which he raped her and then led her to a hotel close by, where he raped her again. When he called up his friends to brag about exploiting her, Ogura reportedly asked him to keep her there to allow multiple people to take advantage of her. Miyano eventually took her to a park where his friends were waiting, after which they went through her bag and found her address written in her notebooks. To force her to cooperate, they threatened to kill her family if she tried to escape. They finally took her to Minato's house, which would be her prison for the next 44 days. On November 27th, Furuta's parents contacted the police to report her disappearance. Tell them that she had run away and was otherwise fine. They believed her and dropped the case. The boys also forced her to act like Minato's girlfriend when his parents were around, but quickly dropped the pretense when they realized that his parents would not report him to the police. The boys brutally tortured her over the next month. The brutality of the torturers escalated over time and initially began with humiliating her sexually before inflicting physical pain. While they also gave her limited food and water initially, they eventually stopped that and gave her a diet of cockroaches and milk instead. Their later statements reveal that their tortures included, but were not limited to, making her stand outside naked during the winter, force-feeding her large amounts of alcohol, making her smoke multiple cigarettes at once, urinating on her, beating her, penetrating her with various objects, and burning her with lighter fluid. They even stated that at one point they penetrated her with a hot light bulb that exploded inside her. Take a moment to let that sink in. Animals treat other animals better. These boys turned into complete monsters while Faruda continued to do her best to defy them and fight back. Not before long, however, the severity of the attacks and her next-to-nothing diet began to take a toll on her body. She became crippled and could not move at all. Her face became swollen. She was severely malnourished, and her body was so injured that it became unable to urinate. As a result, her flesh began to rot while she was still alive. Her condition made her captors lose all sexual interest in her, and they found another 19-year-old woman to gang rape who, like Faruda, was also on her way home from work. On January 4, 1989, a final brutal attack on her would end her life. Miano had lost the game of mahjong the night before and decided to vent his anger out on Faruda. For over 2 hours, her captors tortured her and beat her repeatedly. They poured lighter fluid on her and set her on fire multiple times, which she apparently tried to put out before she became unresponsive. They dropped dumbbells on her stomach, forced her to drink her own urine, placed short candles on her eyelids, and dropped hot wax all over her body. At some point, they covered their hands with plastic bags to continue beating her. She eventually went into a state of shock and began to convulse, after which she succumbed to her injuries and soon passed away. The following day, Minato's brother called to inform them that Faruda may have died, after which the panic group loaded her body in a drum and filled it with wet concrete. They went on with their lives until Miano and the grower of the grottos were killed. Arrested on January 23rd for the gang rape and kidnapping of the 19-year-old from December. Women's underwear was found at their addresses and they were finally questioned over 2 months later. During their interrogation, Miano thought that one of the officers knew about his role in Farudi's murder, thinking that Ogura might have confessed. Out of sheer chance, he told the officers where to find her body, which puzzled them since they thought that he might have been talking about another unsolved murder. The police found her body in the concrete drum the next day and identified her by her fingerprints. Several arrests were made immediately afterwards. The court initially kept the identities of the boys a secret because most of them were still minors, but a Japanese magazine called Shuken Bunshun found out who the accused were and published them. They said that because of the severity of the crimes that they committed, they did not deserve to have the right of anonymity. All of the accused pled guilty to the charges of committing bodily injury that resulted in death instead of murder. This is where the case gets even more heartbreaking. The ringleader, Miano, was sentenced to just 17 years in prison. He appealed to the court, but they gave him an additional 3 years instead. The rest of the boys got much lighter sentences, serving only 7 to 8 years because they were below 18 at the time. All of them were released by 2010 and went on to commit more crimes, with Minato even being charged for beating and slashing the throat of another incident. Shows that after Aguro was released, he was soon arrested again for beating men for 4 hours because he thought that his girlfriend was involved with him. He allegedly boasted about his role in Faruda's rape, torture, and murder, and even told his victim that he had killed before and knew how to get away with it. Faruda's grave was also vandalized numerous times by Yagura's mother later on because she believed that her son's life was ruined by her. Yeah, this case is beyond messed up. I know that while researching for this video, I was disturbed for days. It really makes you think about how messed up we have to be as a society to let the convicts of such a ghastly crime off so easily. Because guess what? If you don't give monsters like this the punishment that they deserve, it only encourages them to commit more heinous crimes. They learn that their actions have little consequence. Yep, this case really had the worst kind of resolution ever. What makes this case so unimaginably horrible is not just the gruesome treatment Junko went through for 44 agonizing days, but also that she never got the justice she deserved even over 30 years later. Her rapists, torturers, and killers still walk free in Japan today and have carried out more crimes since then. To give you some perspective, people who have gotten arrested for carrying marijuana have received longer sentences than these actual monsters. While Faruda never got the justice that she deserved, we only hope that by remembering her bravery, we could play a part in contributing to what she never received at court. She should not be forgotten, and neither should the failure of the legal system. The Lynn family murder. The Lynn family lived in North Epping, New South Wales of Australia, and they were an upright family who had their needs met. The husband Min Lynn and his wife Lily Lynn ran a successful family-owned newsagent in Sydney. Min and Lily had 3 children, June Brenda, who was 15, Henry, who was 12, and Terry, who was 9. The Lynn family also had Lily's sister Irene living with the family. The family had a cordial relationship where everyone openly expressed whatever was on their mind. It was a family with no secrecy as they lived and worked together. Things were all smooth and rosy for the Lin family before something unexpected happened which ruined the family forever. During the early hours of one Saturday morning in July 2009, when the busy shop of Lin's family didn't open for business, it was odd for almost everyone who knew the shop. However, Kathy, who was also Lily's sister and happened to work in the news agency, began to receive calls from curious customers about why the shop was locked. Upon hearing the situation of things, Kathy began to suspect something wasn't right with the shop being locked. This prompted Kathy and her husband Robert to go check the home of Min and Lily. As they arrived at the Lin family residence in the quiet suburb of North Epping, the front door, which was usually locked, was unlocked. Kathy was beginning to feel frightened about the development. As she and her husband took steps forward, they could see sprinkles of blood here and there. They took a bold decision to be sure of whatever was happening or might have happened. They went upstairs in the bedroom, and what she found next was a horrifying scene that kept her shivering for some minutes. Both Min and Lily were drenched in a pool of blood, bludgeoned to death by a weapon later described as hammer-like. In the next room, they found Kathy and Lily's sister Irene with the same awful fate. Both Min and Lily's young sons, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, were not spared either of this gruesome attack. They too were brutally murdered similarly like every other person in the house. In their bedroom, blood splattered all over the walls of Lin's house, which suggested that a great struggle had taken place before the gruesome attack. Kathy placed a call to the local police informing them about the gruesome situation which had occurred at the residence of the Lins. She could not utter her words fluently as she was shivering about her extended family who had just been horrifically murdered. The situation had a little twist here. Who was the only member of the Lins family was paired as she was away on a school excursion in New Caledonia at the time of the gruesome attack. Brando was still at the school excursion when she learned about the gruesome killing of her family through Facebook. The police and paramedics did arrive at the scene, but it was so gruesome that they had to implore forensic analysts to help identify the members since the faces of the family were beyond recognition. They later concluded that the weapon that was used was likely to be a hammer. It only went from bad to worse as Brenda and the extended family had to live with a new harsh reality. Days after the incident, Kathy and her husband were finally composed enough to make emotional public pleas calling for support to help solve the murders. Brenda, who was the only daughter and the only surviving child of the Lin from the gruesome, went on to live with the Shees as they initiated the idea for her to come live with them and be a part of their new family as she has no other place to go to at the time. However, the lack of strong leads as well as the nature of the vicious attacks suggested a more personal motive than a simple burglary gone wrong. The authorities turned to family members and possible connections for their investigation. Robert Shi, a former ear, nose, and throat specialist in China before moving to Melbourne in 2006, was one of the early suspects, as many indications pointed to him. According to the Daily Telegraph, Shi had opened a restaurant in Melbourne, but when his new venture soon failed, he and his wife Kathy moved to Sydney and had been unemployed ever since. Various reports had also suggested that she was close to his extended family. It would take over a year for any breakthrough evidence to surface. During a forensic examination of Shi's garage in May 2010, experts found a tiny stain on the floor of the unkempt garage, known as Stain 91. According to The Australian, one of the forensic experts trained in bloodstain pattern analysis was convinced that Stain 91 looked like a transfer stain, the kind of stain produced from coming into contact with an object such as a weapon or a bag wet with blood. Lab tests, however, proved that the tiny mark was consistent with the DNA of the slain Lin family members. She was subsequently arrested in May 2011 while his wife Kathy maintained his innocence. As all these new developments were happening, Brenda was still living with her new family. It took 4 trials spanning over 7.5 years before she was convicted. The first trial was aborted when a possible sexual motive emerged, but the court refused to identify the victim as she was still a minor at that point. She later opened up on how Robert has been sexually assaulting her in her home while her parents were still alive, and how he continued to assault her after Kathy and Robert took her in as a new family. The second trial was halted when the judge fell ill, while the third trial ended in a hung jury. Finally, in 2017, she was found guilty of murder. After the verdict was announced, she proclaimed, "I did not murder the Lin family. I am innocent." The only surviving child of the gruesome incident that claimed the lives of the Lin family, she said that it was 2009 and the high school student was preparing to fly to New Caledonia for an excursion, and looked around the departure gate to see her classmates kissing their families goodbye. Being a prideful teenager, I did not say anything to my father. I just stood there awkwardly and thought to myself, it's just going to be a week. I am going to see them again really soon. Ms. Lin, now in her 20s, told a sentencing hearing for her uncle Robert Shi last week. But while she was overseas, she murdered her entire family. Her father Min Norman Lin, her mother Yunli Lily Lin, her aunt Yun Bin Irene Lin, and North Epping home on July 18, 2009. To this day, my biggest regret was not hugging my father and telling him I loved him. To say thank you for being an amazingly loving and caring parent. Paulette Jabara Farah, it's every parent's worst nightmare to put their child to sleep at night and then find them vanish before daybreak. Well, that's exactly what happened to Paulette Jabara Farah. The worst part was that she was unexpectedly found between something no one ever thought about. Paulette Jabara Farah was 4 years old when she mysteriously disappeared from her house on March 22, 2010. The case became prominent because she lived in one of the most upscale neighborhoods in Mexico and Huizcalucan. She had recently returned from a trip with her father Mauricio Gubera and sister, but her mother, Lizette Farah, had gone on a trip with her friend, Amanda de la Rosa, her lover, and multiple other men. Suspicions of her infidelity made Lizette the prime suspect in the case. The case became even more complicated when the family and 2 housekeepers provided inconsistent statements to the authorities. Paulette was born with both physical disabilities and a language disorder and had 2 nannies who helped care for her, Erica and Martha Casimiro. The family was considered relatively affluent. Paulette's father, Mauricio Gubera, worked in real estate while her mom, Lizette Farah, was an attorney. On one evening in 2010, Lizette claimed she had put her little girl to bed as normal, but when her nanny Erica came into her room the next morning, the little girl was nowhere to be seen. There were no signs of forced entry into the house or any indication that a struggle had taken place. The CCTV cameras, which surrounded the property where Paulette Jabara Farah lives, failed to show either when the child was leaving or being taken. The house had 2 family dogs that never made any noise during the night either. Where could the 4-year-old have gone without a single trace? The story quickly turned into a media frenzy. Flyers were posted, billboards were erected, and ads were all over the TV and on public transport. Lizette even made a public plea on television for her daughter's abductor to come forward. The search sparked a great deal of public interest, but soon many started placing the blame on Paulette's parents. The local community all came together to search for Paulette, but nothing was found. Alberto Basbas, the Attorney General of the state, became involved and launched what would become a huge 9-day intensive search and investigation. His involvement became the initial controversy. Many children are said to be reported missing in Mexico, but it wasn't until Paulette Jabara Farah from a richer family went missing that authorities put all their resources into finding her. Ultimately, police were baffled and found it very difficult to find the lead. To begin a tireless hunt for the little girl. A week after the disappearance of Paulette, it was announced that her parents and nannies were taken into custody. The first suspect identified in the case was Lizette. The stories which Paulette's parents and the nannies shared had inconsistencies, and the media and public began to become suspicious. This is when a shocking revelation came to light. According to a Mexican news report, Zocalo, there were some undercover recordings of Paulette's parents and their other daughter found. This contained a conversation that sounded like Lizette telling her daughter not to admit anything to the investigators, otherwise she'd get in trouble. Was she responsible for the disappearance of Paulette? However, Lizette claimed she was taken out of context. Both of Paulette's nannies, Erica and Martha Casimiro, claimed that the girl's parents seemed unconcerned while everyone was frantically searching for her. Even Lizette's media appearances made people uncomfortable. Her cold nature made people wonder if she was the one responsible for the death of her daughter. It was revealed that Lizette could have had a personality or mental disorder. According to Sandra Yadium, a legal psychiatric expert working with investigators, said Lizette has always remained very distant in matters of affection and emotional attachment disorder. A further twist in the story was that when Paulette, who had gone missing for 9 days, was somehow found in the same bedroom in which she was sleeping before her disappearance, an officer in the case caught a whiff of a petrified smell. This led him to find where Paulette, the very bed from which she disappeared. On March 31, 2010, Paulette's body was finally found. It was a bizarre finding as she was tucked away at the foot of the bed. The autopsy, as reported by CNN, ruled that Paulette's death was an accident, as it was reported that she had seemingly rolled to the foot of the bed and accidentally fell and lodged herself in the gap between the mattress and footboard. She then suffocated to death. According to reports at the time, the autopsy showed that Paulette died via asphyxiation and compressed the abdominal thorax. There were no drugs or toxic substances found in her body or any signs of physical abuse, according to the San Diego Union Tribune. Moreover, Bazes believed that Paulette's body hadn't been moved. The position the child was in when she was found was the same as the position she was when she died. That is, the original and final position is the same, he claimed in the Union Tribune. But conspiracy theories around Paulette's cause of death still abound. Someone noticed a pair of pajamas on top of the bed while Lisette was giving a TV interview before Paulette was found. Lying to police in the course of a murder investigation is never a good idea, and when you're the sole surviving member of the family, it's an even worse decision. As a result of Patricia's statements and behavior after the crimes, Patricia Colombo became the chief suspect. In all bids to unravel the true case of the murder of Colombo's family, a hint came in. Inspired by the promise of reward money, a friend led police to the men who had discussed killing the Colombo family with Patricia. The detectives quickly established roles for themselves to make Patricia crack. Instead of good cop, bad cop, one detective described as looking like Tom Jones assumed the role of boyfriend. At her family's wake and funeral, Patty flirted openly with the detective to the point where her grieving relatives thought he was the despised DeLuca who had alienated her from her family. DeLuca's caught a notice in the corner of the funeral home. When Patricia wasn't joking, smoking, or flirting, she flung herself on top of her parents' and little brother's closed caskets, wailing with grief. After the couple was arrested, DeLuca's employees revealed that they had seen him washing and burning blood-stained clothes on the day after the murders. He had kept them silent by threatening their families. DeLuca attempted to have these witnesses killed by a cellmate, but another inmate thwarted the plan by telling the police. Rose, the investigating detective, chronicled how Colombo, then 19, plotted for 8 months to kill her family, soliciting friends and acquaintances to carry out the murders. The investigating detective revealed that in the summer of 1975, Patricia met 2 men that she seduced and tried to hire to kill her family. Patricia claims one of the men forced her to have sex. She provided them with a diagram of the Colombo home and photos of the family. However, the men did not act on her request, and on May 4, 1976, she and DeLuca, her 37-year-old boyfriend, entered the home and attacked her family. During the course of interrogation, Patricia revealed that she wanted to beat her father to the punch, claiming she feared he had ordered a hit on her and her lover. Evidence revealed that the duo were willing participants in the murder, with Patricia acting as a decoy to be admitted to the house. When Frank Colombo opened the door and turned around, DeLuca entered and shot him with a .32 caliber handgun. During a detailed narration of how the incidents occurred, it was revealed that DeLuca, who did the shooting, shot Frank, who had been killed first as he tried to escape by running up the living room stairs. Patricia bludgeoned in her father with a bowling trophy. Mary was found cowering in the bathroom, her favorite room in the house, where she had once lovingly hand-painted each bathroom tile with gold filigree, who had been shot dead center between the eyes. Patricia or DeLuca slit her throat just in case the bullet didn't take care of her. Although the Cook County medical examiner said that Mary was probably dead before she even hit the floor. The last victim was Michael, who had slept through the initial gunshots. The two woke Michael up and stood him upright, half asleep in his bedroom, while DeLuca shot him. Patty then stabbed Michael 87 times with her mother's sewing scissors. They said at first glance it looked as if Michael has had a case of the measles, until they realized that the measles were dozens of tiny red gashes. DeLuca admitted to shooting the victims. However, Colombo to date has not owned up to her part in the murders. A few days later, Patty was charged with 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. In detailed evidence tendered to the court, Patty was charged with 3 counts of first-degree. The cops determined that Patricia had originally set out to hire hitman, a couple of losers she met in a motel cocktail lounge, to murder her family. She had even gone so far as to draw a map of her parents' house, along with a warning that the family's white miniature poodle was a yapper. After the supposed hitman had strung Patty along, having sex with her and ripping her off of $2,000, Patty persuaded DeLuca to help her carry out the job. Colombo and DeLuca were convicted of shooting her parents, Mary and Frank Colombo, and brother Michael, and mutilating their bodies. They sentenced both the 200 to 300 years in prison for the murders and another 150 years each for conspiracy to commit murder. Colombo received an additional 50-year prison term for solicitation to commit murder. It all ended badly for the lovers who wanted to have it all at all costs. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Solving cold cases is something that is no longer the domain of just government authorities. They are also aided by internet detectives who have devoted many hours, words, and postings to solving long-forgotten cold cases. As it turns out, the hive mind is rather adept at playing detective, but the following are some of history's most perplexing cases that, despite the greatest efforts of professionals, keep puzzling us. Who burned alive the East Dal woman? In 1970, at the height of the Cold War, a burnt body of a lady was discovered in a remote part of Norway. She had taken sleeping drugs, ingested carbon monoxide, and had been burned alive, according to an autopsy. Luggage belonging to the woman was later discovered, containing money from several different countries. She was eventually detected traveling around Europe with several fraudulent passports using various aliases. A family trekking in the East Dal Valley near Bergen in western Norway came across the woman's burnt body. She was badly burned in the front and discovered with her hands lifted to her chest in a defensive stance. Personal items such as a watch, an umbrella, some jewelry, and many empty bottles were strewn about the body. Authorities believe the things were unusually positioned around the body, almost as if they were part of a ceremony. Her clothes were composed of synthetic fibers and didn't have any tags on them. She had eaten between 50 and 70 tablets of phenobarbital and had bruises around her neck. She had also breathed carbon monoxide and soot, indicating that she had been burned alive. Her death was considered suicide by Norwegian officials due to the lack of identifying documents and the presence of a substantial amount of sleeping tablets in her system. A few days later, a pair of luggage containing fingerprints matching the murdered woman was discovered at a train station in Bergen. Inside were wigs, makeup, clothing, eczema ointment, non-prescription eyeglasses, maps, and small sums of money from Norway, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Belgium. 100 Deutsche Marks were also hidden inside the case's lining. Any identifying information had been disconnected, cut out, or rubbed off. Even the eczema cream, which usually included the name of the prescribing doctor on the packaging, couldn't provide a clue. Heard of in Norway at the time. According to stable isotope research of her teeth, she was born in Nuremberg and grew up on the German-French border. Inside the luggage, the investigation detectives discovered a shopping bag, which they used to track out the woman's movements before she died. She had visited Norway numerous times over the year, staying in various hotels using counterfeit passports and false aliases. Tealed from Brussels at one hotel. She was Elizabeth Leenhofer from a stand in another. People who interacted with her were eventually tracked down and interviewed. They all spoke of a gorgeous, stylish woman with black hair and brown eyes who was attractive, pleasant, and only paid in cash. She also wore wigs, spoke numerous languages, including French, Flemish, and English, and seemed tense most of the time. Years later, the Norwegian National Defense released information indicating the woman may have been traveling around the country watching the testing of the top-secret anti-ship Penguin missile. A fisherman had noticed the woman following the movements of Norwegian army troops. Is there any logic to this pie story? During the Cold War, Norway was a hotspot in the early 1970s. It not only shared a border with the Soviet Union, but it also assisted the United States and the United Kingdom in monitoring Russian nuclear testing and submarine warfare. Russian intelligence assets, as well as components from the CIA, MI6, and Mossad, were known to be present in the country. After seeing a sketch of the Istal woman in 2005, a man from Bergen came forward. He reported seeing a person matching her description hiking on a hillside approximately an hour away from Istal 5 days before her body was discovered in 1970. She was dressed inappropriately for the weather and was being pursued by two males who looked southern, according to him. He told the cops what he observed, but they dismissed his claim. A section of the lower jaw of the Istal woman was removed and saved before she was buried. Her teeth showed traces of extensive dental surgery, which was unusual for Norway at the period. In 2017, a stable isotope examination of her teeth revealed that she was born in Nuremberg around 1930 and grew up near the French-German border. Her dental work was found to have been done in Central Asia, East Asia, Southern Europe, and South America. The case continues to pique people's interest. In 2018, the BBC World Service and the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation released a podcast called Death in Ice Valley, which delves into the death of the Istil woman in great detail. While the stable isotope study provided answers to some concerns, such as the woman's age and birth country, many more remain unanswered. Was she a saboteur? If that's the case, who killed her and why? Who was she employed by? Why haven't any of her friends, family, or loved ones come forward? This is a case that might remain shrouded in mystery forever. Ricky McCormick's last and only cipher. Ricky McCormick was discovered dead in a cornfield in West Alton, Missouri on June 30, 1999. 2 pages of the handwritten notes in McCormick's front pocket included a complicated cipher that the FBI, the American Cryptogram Association, and countless amateur codebreakers have yet to decode. According to a family relative, McCormick was a high school dropout who could not write and code. He couldn't spell a word and could only doodle. Authorities had to use fingerprints to make a definitive ID because McCormick's body had been rotting in the field for several days before being discovered. Even after an autopsy and a toxicology report, medical examiners struggled to pinpoint a cause of death due to the rate of the composition. However, death as a homicide after considering the suspicious aspect of where his body was discovered, as the region has previously been used to dump murder victims. The 2 notes discovered in McCormick's pocket had 30 lines of seemingly random letters and numbers on them. Some of the code is enclosed in parentheses, while others are circled. McCormick was an ex-con who worked part-time at a gas station and went back and forth between staying with relatives and living on the streets. He also had heart and lung problems and was receiving disability benefits at the time of his death. He had a slew of offenses on his record, as well as a spell in prison for statutory rape. The region where he was discovered, his body was discovered 50 miles from his home. According to his ex-girlfriend, McCormick traveled by bus to Florida sometimes, where he allegedly served as a courier for drug dealers transporting marijuana back to Missouri. McCormick's mental state has been the subject of various reports. McCormick's public attorney claimed he was suffering from some mental sickness or defect while awaiting trial for statutory rape. They had him evaluated by a local psychologist who determined that McCormick was mentally capable of standing trial. McCormick was described as street smart with an active imagination and a naive childlike illnesses. McCormick's fiancée reported a few days before his death that he was agitated and apprehensive after returning from a cocaine smuggling job in Florida. In the days leading up to his death, he visited various hospitals for treatment of chest problems and asthma. Some investigators believe he wasn't asking for medical help, but rather a safe place to remain since he feared his life was in danger. The FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit had spent all of its efforts cracking the encryption by 2011. In a 2011 statement, the FBI stated breaking the code could expose the victim's whereabouts before his death and potentially lead to the solution of a homicide. According to some family members, Ricky had been writing in code since he was a child. The notes are said to be real by experts, including the FBI agent in charge of the case. Small characteristics in the handwriting, such as circles around sections of the code, document potentially a to-do list. According to the FBI, the most difficult aspect of this case is that McCormick most likely wanted the notes to be read only by him. Unlike him, other well-known ciphers, such as the Zodiac Killer, wished for their codes to be solved at some point. Of course, there's a chance McCormick didn't develop the code. Specialists haven't been able to establish the notes are in his handwriting decisively. It's also that the code was developed for him by the drug traffickers for whom he worked, or that he was simply carrying the cipher from one location to another without realizing its significance. The FBI has set up a website dedicated to the case, inviting amateur code breakers to participate in the investigation. Ultimately, it is thought that the code contains information that will aid in the capture of McCormick's killers. Murder in the Vatican. Emanuela Orlandi was born and raised in Vatican City, the Pope's residence and a major tourist destination. She was on her way home from a flute lesson on June 22, 1983 when she vanished. She called home later that evening and spoke with one of her sisters, but her family never heard from her after that. Orlandi was last seen at a bus station in Rome city center before disappearing forever. In July 2019, forensic researchers discovered a strangely empty crypt while searching for Orlandi's remains. Since 1983, the Orlandi family has been following leads concerning Emmanuel's disappearance, which has taken them down some unusual paths. They petitioned the Vatican in 2019 to gain access to Princess Sophie of Hohenlohe's grave, which she died in 1836. Them to the tomb, and they opened 2 burial sites where Orlandi's remains were allegedly buried. There was no trace of Orlandi or anyone else when the experts opened the tomb. Although no one had been inside the tomb since 1836, it was evident that something unusual had occurred. There were no human skeletons or burial urns to be found. The Vatican had anticipated finding 2 tombs, but not 2 empty tombs. They were absolutely bamboozled. The Orlandi family has had to deal with a slew of bizarre tips and suspicions concerning Emanuela's whereabouts. The evidence varies from hearsay to cryptic musings, all of which raise more questions than they answer. Pietro Orlandi has received a plethora of information concerning his sister, and he is prone to following up on any leads he has provided, no matter how bizarre they may appear. Disappearance. Many of the tips they get come from people who think they saw her in a crowd, but the details seem more like movie plots than real-life scenarios. Regardless of how bizarre some of these leads are, the family investigates them in the hopes of learning more about Orlandi's disappearance. In 2008, Sabrina Minardi, who dated mobster Enrico De Pitis, claimed that Orlandi had been former president of the Vatican Bank. But it's unclear why he allegedly wanted her off the streets. Marchenkas died in 2006, and despite his involvement in an Italian banking crisis in the 1980s, no allegations of kidnapping or child endangerment were ever made. The Vatican simply stated that Minardi's claims came from a source whose value is exceedingly doubtful. Some have claimed to have seen Orlandi alive over the years. The Orlandi family is still hoping to find Emanuela alive after 3 decades of searching, no matter how unlikely it seems. Some of those who claim to have seen Orlandi believe they've run into her on the street, with tales coming in from as far as Turkey and England. Others, on the other hand, appear to be more interested in personal gain. Appearance in 2005, alerting the family to a local mobster's tomb. To solve the case, go see who's buried in the crypt of the Basilica of Sant'Apollinare, the caller stated, referring to the burial of former mobster Enrico De Pitis, who died in a gun duel in 1990. The same caller stated that Cardinal Ugo Poletti, Rome's vicar general at the time, ordered Orlandi to be taken off the streets. The tipper, however, did not provide any additional information on Poletti's involvement, nor did he provide any evidence to back up his claim. When forensic experts explored the grave, they discovered not just De Pitis's remains, but also numerous more bones. To Orlandi at the time, but no findings have been released. Despite all of the hints that have been thrown out to the press since Orlandi's disappearance in the early 1980s, no one has ever been arrested. Anonymous sources have mentioned several Italian mobsters in the news, but none have ever been officially linked to Orlandi. Mehmet Ali Agha's ludicrous assertions were essential in hindering the further investigation into the issue. Bulgarian spies and the KGB have also been blamed for the crime. In addition to the Grey Wolves and a nebulous Masonic organization, Roberto Calvi, one of the suspects, was discovered hanged in London just before Orlandi vanished. Everyone, including prominent members of the Vatican, seems to have an opinion about Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance. The Vatican's leading exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth, believes Orlandi was kidnapped to parties and used as a slave. The allegation is debatable and Amorth has no evidence to back it up, but he is adamant in his conviction. In addition to his theories concerning Orlandi's presumed captivity, Amorth is convinced that someone from the Vatican assisted in her abduction and that she has since died. He told the publication La Stampa this was a sexually motivated crime. Parties were planned, with the Vatican Gendarmerie serving as the girl's recruiter. Diplomatic staff from a foreign embassy to the Holy See were participating in the network. Fiel became a victim of the circle. Emanuela Orlandi's family has concluded that more than one person is responsible for her abduction decades after she went. They haven't indicated whether they believe the death was caused by a government or religious organization, but her brother, Pietro Orlandi, finds it inexplicable that no one has come forward with concrete evidence. I'm incapable of accepting injustices, especially when it involves my sister. Especially knowing that there are people who know what transpired throughout the years. Their right to know the truth and their right to be treated fairly are precious rights to me that no one can ever take away. Some cases mark crucial chapters in the history books of law enforcement agencies. But this case is almost the whole history book. When the state police department spans more than half of their entire existence on a single case, they cannot resist being attached to it. Today, we look into the fourth oldest cold case in the United States, which was solved by a 19-year-old genealogy wizard. But the killer was already dead. This is the story of 9-year-old Marie Schiavarella and her family. The tragic story began on the morning of March 18, 1964. Marie Schiavarella, a quiet girl from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, enjoyed playing the organ and aspired to be a nun. One day, she set out to bring some canned goods to her teacher at St. Joseph's parochial school. She then later planned to attend the morning mass. But Schiavarella never made it back. She was last seen walking east on West 4th Street at 8:10 a.m. Reports claim that on the cold morning of March 18th, while Maurice was on her way back to the school, she was asked by the neighbors to come up and get warm. But Maurice refused as she had to get back to her teacher with the goods. Neither the neighbors nor Maurice could have anticipated that from that moment. Maurice and her obedience will be history for the next 5.5 decades. Somewhere along her way, she crossed paths with evil. At approximately 1 p.m. the same day, a man noticed what looked like a large doll in a coal mining waste pit. When he looked close, the doll was actually Maurice Schiavarella. Her body was discovered north of Route 309 in Hazel Township, close to the Hazleton Airport. The investigation revealed Maurice was physically and sexually assaulted, murdered, and left at the scene with all her clothing and personal belongings. Before dumping her in a coal mining waste pit, the killer bound, gagged, raped, and strangled her. The discovery of her body shocked the entire Hazleton community. It was a heartbreak that was felt by everyone in the town, especially by the children. Children who were Marissa's age started to be afraid while they were alone or unescorted. The case changed the way people lived and how they approached their children's safety in the town. Well, good evening, Nick. I can tell you that the brutal murder of 9-year-old Marissa Schiavarella still haunts many people in Hazleton. And I can tell you, growing up in that city, everyone had heard about the murder, and some believed that murder in some ways marked the end of the innocence of that city. It didn't take long for the Pennsylvania State Police to begin their investigative efforts, which would ultimately last for decades. The authorities did not know that in this case, to even get a lead to work on, it would take years of grinding and scanning through databases. There were no leads or suspects immediately after the killing. The police could not retrieve any useful evidence from Marissa's body which could lead them to her killer. They had no idea that it would take them over 50 years to find a single lead. In 2007, investigators were able to develop a DNA profile of the suspect from fluids left on Schiavarell's jacket. But the DNA didn't match any criminals in their system. They checked the database monthly against all other criminals that had DNA in the system. But there was no successful match. Then in 2019, police tried a different approach and uploaded the DNA from Schiavarell's jacket to the genealogical database. This time, there was a match, but to what appeared to be a very distant relative. The DNA match was insufficient to get the relative into custody or charge him with murder. To generate public interest and garner leads in the case, in 2018, Pennsylvania State Police used the technology provided by Parabon Nano Labs to generate a snapshot phenotype facial prediction of the suspect from his DNA. The technology generated possible photos of the suspect at 3 different ages of life: 25, 40, and 60. The pictures generated were released in the public domain, but unfortunately no witnesses came out with any leads that could lead to Marissa's killer. This was at a time when even Marissa's parents had died. They did not live enough to see what would unfold in Marissa's mystery ahead. Her siblings had said that her parents never sought revenge or punishment to their daughter's killer. They just wanted justice, but they did not make it alive to the other end of this investigation. Finally, in 2020, the police got help from an unlikely source. An 18-year-old named Eric Schubert emailed the department and offered to build out a family tree. He'd volunteered with other cold cases before, and police accepted his help since Eric was known as a hardworking boy and a genius genealogy wizard. Schubert identified a number of family members, many of whom voluntarily shared their DNA with the police. The family tree eventually led the police to Marie Schiavarell's killer, James Paul Ford. Ford was 22 years of age back then, and he had a criminal history of sexual assaults prior to Schiavarell's killing. Unfortunately, police could not prosecute Ford because he had already died in 1980 and the cause of his death had been a heart attack. Police exhumed his body in January 2022. They found out a month later that his DNA was a match to the fluids left on Sugar Alice's jacket. This information was released to the press in a press conference by Pennsylvania police, which lasted for more than an hour. For Chavarala's surviving family, the news was bittersweet. Her sister Carmen Marie Radke stated that their family will always feel the emptiness and the sorrow of Morris's absence. She added further that they will continue to ask themselves what would have been or could have been on that fateful day. Her family also went ahead and praised the persistent effort of Pennsylvania State Police, because of which now they have gotten closure in a sense of being at peace with Marissa's murder. The grit and the determination of the Pennsylvania police to solve this case was applaudable. They left no stone unturned to find out who the killer was, and this was also a success story of a 19-year-old Eric Schubert who utilized his genius for very right purposes. But the question here still remains. After 5.5 decades into the investigation, when the killer was already buried in his grave, was justice actually served to Maurice and her family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is the case of 11-year-old Laura Ann Heuser, who was abducted, sexually assaulted, and brutally murdered. The girl's face haunted a detective for years, and the agent admitted with his teary eyes that he would see the little girl every time he closed his eyes during those years. On November 6, 1986, Laura disappeared while she was walking home from a gas station in St. Lucie County, Central Florida. After she went missing on November 9th, her dead body was found in a drainage ditch. Her body was immediately sent for an autopsy, and asphyxiation was listed as the cause of death. She had been raped and later strangled to death. The authorities launched an investigation into the murder, but they could not find any physical evidence from the crime scene. The killer murdered the juvenile victim and later altered the crime scene by placing the victim in a drainage ditch in an attempt to destroy all the physical evidence. This move of the killer hinted towards his experience with dealing with crime and evidence. The police found traces of male DNA on Laura's body. The DNA was kept preserved in sexual assault kit as there was no one to match the DNA with. Back then, DNA technology and the criminal database were not advanced enough to provide the authorities with any lead towards the killer. Laura's case eventually went cold in the files of the St. Lucie County Police Department. Nearly 4 decades later, Detective Paul Taylor with the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office reopened the case. I had already been through the crime scene photos, the case file, and what they're telling me does not match what I'm seeing, claimed Detective Paul. Taylor was able to reach out to the original witnesses who had originally spotted Laura. The questioning of the witnesses led him to a fact that it was one of their own deputies who had turned the witnesses away and later moved the body. After the initial point when they found her, a detective showed up. He sent them away from the scene, and the witnesses were never contacted by law enforcement again. In February 2022, Detective Taylor revealed that it was their own former sheriff's deputy, James Howard Harrison, who is now their prime and the only suspect in the killing of the 11-year-old. Harrison was also a church pastor and worked for 10 separate law enforcement agencies since the 1960s. It was Harrison who saw Laura alive for the last time. He abducted her on the way, raped her, and after killing her, he dumped her body in the ditch. I am actually standing there in front of this victim's family, and I'm telling them that one of our deputies is the one who did it. It's rough, stated Detective Taylor. Investigators said Harrison had a pattern of inappropriate behavior with young women. Unfortunately, Harrison was not alive for the authorities to charge him for murder and rape. He died of cancer in 2008, but the detectives got a warrant to exhume his body from the Oakey Cemetery for a DNA sample. But by then, his DNA was too deteriorated to match with the sample found on Laura's body. Detective Taylor said that Harrison was forced to resign from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office 5 months after the Laura Ann Heuser homicide, and also was forced to resign from his church because of his sexually inappropriate behavior with young adults. He had been previously accused of molesting children several times. For Laura's older brother, it was disbelieved that his sister's killer was even finally revealed. It naturally was like a dream. After all this time, you're telling me you're able to tell us who murdered our little sister, said her brother. The Heuser family said that they are so grateful to the detective Paul Taylor who solved this case with immense determination, but they were frustrated with what they believed was a shoddy investigation at the time Laura was killed. From our perspective, things were purposefully overlooked and not done. There were such humongous gaps in the investigation, claimed the Heuser family. The police department now claims that they are now checking their own cold cases around the state because they believe there were other victims of Harrison. What do you guys think? Did the former deputy use his authority as a deputy sheriff and his standing as a preacher in the community to go ahead and violate children during the entire course of his life? How do we keep our women safe from these authoritative men, who manipulate the laws and the system for their own evil desires? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is the story of 23-year-old Krista Bramlett from New Providence, Tennessee, who was found dead in her mobile home during the time when she struggled to find a roof over her head. It took 22 years to solve her murder. Krista Renee Bramlett was born in 1973 in California to Jim Langley and Kim Venable. She was known to be smart, caring, and funny. She was close to her family but chose to be financially independent and lived alone. Krista and her mother had lived together in Clarksville until 1995, when Venable relocated to Texas with Krista's 2 children. Krista remained in Clarksville to complete her GED. Krista lived alone in Clarksville as she worked toward her high school equivalency, so she could make a better life for her 2 young children. Her neighbors called her aloof, but her family called her warm and loving. On Monday, October 28, 1996, Krista's landlord stopped by her mobile home to check on fire damage from the week before when a trash can caught fire. Instead of looking at smoke damage, he saw her shoeless body laying in the flickering glow of a small color television in the living room. Jeff Pennington, the landlord, stated, "At the time of Krista's death, Clarksville police were investigating the killings of several women who had been killed in their homes. Police insisted that the killings were unrelated to this case. With Krista's death, the investigation started with the Clarksville Police Department Crime Scene Unit processing the scene and an autopsy by the Montgomery County Medical Examiner. The autopsy found Krista died by suffocation, and a rape kit found evidence of an assault. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation developed DNA evidence, which was filed with the combined DNA index system. Around 6 detectives started with the neighbors, interviewing between 50 to 60 people to find potential witnesses. One neighbor said she saw Krista on October 27, 1996, sitting on her stoop like she always did. But Krista gave an aloof air, and people usually left her alone. Within a week, police had received nearly dozens of tips and they hoped to have an arrest soon, but the leads didn't go anywhere, there were no potential suspects found, and the years flew by without any arrest. The investigation resulted in more than 1,500 pages of documents. After 22 years, in February 2019, Clarksville police got the call they had been waiting so long for. There was a suspect in Arizona that matched the DNA from Chris' rape kit, 48-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth. Kenneth was an unknown to the police back in 1996, but they didn't suspect he could have had anything to do with Chris' death. CPD cold case detective Michael Allery stated that Hudspeth's name had never surfaced in the initial investigation. Allery interviewed Hudspeth, who admitted to being in Clarksville at the time of Chris' death and to being in her home on the day of her death. Further, Hudspeth did not refute any of the facts of the case as presented to him. Hudspeth lived in the trailer park at the time and moved just after Chris' death in 1997. He had been arrested several times over the years, but his DNA wasn't successfully processed until 2019. Hudspeth was taken into custody on April 16th by Phoenix police and charged with criminal homicide. He will be extradited to Tennessee and booked into the Montgomery County Jail. He claimed he did drugs with Bramlett once before when he lived in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park in Clarksville. Despite those claims, Bramlett's toxicology report came back clean with a low blood alcohol concentration level. When he was asked if he had sex with her, he first refused, but when shown the autopsy results and the DNA found inside Bramlett and on her bra, he claimed that he was so doped that he doesn't remember if he killed or had sex with Bramlett. "I was on bad dope. I know her. Did I have sex with her? I mean, I don't remember that," said Hudspeth in the courtroom. He further added, "I just don't see myself raping and killing this woman. I hope I didn't." Bramlett's family members were notified as soon as the break in the case was confirmed. "I knew all along that it was just a matter of time. There was never any doubt in our minds that they would find who had done it," said Krista's grandmother. In January 2022, 51-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty and sentenced to life prison plus 20 years for the murder of Krista Bramlett. This is the story of 9-year-old Daryl Johnson, whose murder almost resulted in a false execution of an innocent man. The mystery of her death was considered solved for most of 2 decades and then heart-wrenchingly re-emerged as a cold case in 2001. It was 8 a.m. on the morning of February 24, 1982. Daryl was walking 6 blocks from her home to the Lincoln Elementary School, but she never made it. A massive search for the Nampa girl ended 3 days later, when a fisherman found her body next to the Snake River in rural Canyon County. An autopsy revealed that the child had been sexually assaulted and had suffered blunt force injuries to her torso and her head. The police also collected male hair and male DNA from the crime scene. In September 1982, 34-year-old Charles Fain was arrested for Daryl Ann's rape and murder. Mr. Fain was arrested on the basis of a hair sample, which he gave voluntarily to the police, and the fact that he lived a block away from the Johnson family added up to his arrest. After being arrested, Fain denied any involvement in Daryl's murder. He even passed a polygraph test. But despite his denial and passing the test, he was charged with the murder of Daryl Johnson. At his trial, prosecutors mentioned that a shoe print found near the body could have been Fain's. In addition, 2 jailhouse informants testified that they had heard Fain admit to committing the crime, and in exchange for his testimony, the 2 informants received a reduced jail sentence. Despite this buildup against him, Fain remained firm on his argument that he was innocent. He claimed that he was 100 miles away from the block when Darlin was murdered. His testimony was corroborated by the other witnesses. The judge did not rule him out as a suspect. The results of his polygraph test were permitted as evidence in the court, and the DNA technology back then wasn't advanced enough to prove Fain's innocence. On November 4, 1983, Fain was convicted, and in March 1984, he was sentenced to death. For nearly 2 decades, Fain was behind the bars in isolation. Then came 1991. He was just 4 days away from being executed, but surprisingly, his execution was pushed back. In 1999, when the DNA technology was a bit more advanced, it was admitted that hair and DNA found on Daryl's body did not belong to Fain, but to an unknown man. He was then immediately exonerated. In August 1999, he was released from the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. In 2019, investigators reopened the case, and in 2020, using genetic genealogy, they determined a 64-year-old suspect whose DNA matched with the sample found on the crime scene. The suspect was David Dalrymple. He was already serving a 20-to-life prison for kidnapping and abusing a child in 2004. In January 2022, Dalrymple was arrested, was formally charged with taking Daryl's life. He now remains in prison, awaiting his probable another life sentence or the death penalty. On the other hand, Charles Fain is doing well and received a sum of $1.4 million for the wrongful conviction, and with that amount, he recently bought a truck for himself. This is the story of Elizabeth Fritzl that shocked the whole world. Let us start the story with some background on Elizabeth's father, the Austrian pensioner Joseph Fritzl. He was an oppressive patriarchal figure in the family, and the fact that his daughter wanted to go out with her friends, party, kiss her boyfriends, and live her life bothered him to such an extent that he eventually took up criminal means to put chains around her. Joseph's grandfather had been married to a woman who couldn't conceive children. Because of this, the grandfather would have affairs with other women and then would coerce his wife into adopting the children they bore. Joseph's mother was one of those children, whom Mitri, a lawyer, described as unloving and sadistic. It's common that child abusers have often suffered child abuse themselves, and the people who mistreat other people have often been mistreated in various ways themselves. This is no excuse or a justification for the monstrous acts of Joseph, but just a speculation of what could have triggered his descent into pure evil. They are bred and fat over the generations. With that in mind, let us look at what happened to Elizabeth Fritzl during those 24 years in a basement and how it all began. On August 28, 1984, 18-year-old Elizabeth Fritzl went missing. Frantic over the whereabouts of her daughter, Rosemary hastily filed the missing persons report. For weeks, there was no word from Elizabeth, and her parents were left to assume the worst. Then out of nowhere, a letter arrived from Elizabeth claiming that she had grown tired of her family life and ran away. Her father, Joseph, told the policeman who came to the house that he had no idea where she would go. He told the police that she has most likely joined a religious cult, something she had talked previously about doing. But the truth was that Joseph Fritzl knew exactly where his daughter was. She was about 20 feet below where the police officer was standing. Elizabeth was a girl full of dreams and aspirations, and she grew tired of her father consistently imposing harsh restrictions on her. She had previously expressed to her mother and her sister about her interest in leaving the family, traveling around the country, and starting a new life on her own as soon as she would turn 18. Joseph overheard this conversation and decided to do something about it. On August 28, 1984, Joseph called his daughter into the basement of the family's home. He was refitting a door to the newly renovated cellar and needed help carrying it. As Elizabeth held the door, Joseph fixed it into place. As soon as it was on the hinges, he swung it open, forcing Elizabeth inside and knocking her unconscious with an ether-soaked towel. For the next 24 years, the inside of the dirt-walled cellar would be the only thing Elizabeth Fritzl would see. Her father would lie to her mother and the police, feeding them stories about how she had run away and joined a cult. The police investigation into her whereabouts would run cold, and before long, the world would forget about the missing Fritzl girl. But Joseph Fritzl wouldn't forget, and over the next 24 years, he would make that very clear to his daughter. For the rest of the Fritzl family, Joseph was a hard-working husband and a father who was thoroughly dedicated to his career. For them, he would head down to the basement every morning at 9 a.m. to draw plans for the machines that he sold. And occasionally, he would spend the night there. Joseph's wife never doubted the actions or the intentions of her husband, since she didn't know what disgusting acts were happening right beneath her feet. At the minimum, Joseph would visit his daughter in the basement 3 times a week. Usually, it was every day. For the first 2 years, he left her alone in captivity. Then he began to rape her, continuing the nightly visits he had begun when she had not even entered the adult phase of her life. 2 years into her captivity, Elizabeth became pregnant and she miscarried 10 weeks into the pregnancy. 2 years later, she fell pregnant again, this time carrying to term. In August of 1988, a baby girl named Kirsten was born, and 2 years later, she gave birth to another baby boy named Stefan. Kirsten and Stefan remained in the cellar with their mother for the duration of her imprisonment, and Joseph brought weekly rations of food and water for them. Elizabeth attempted to teach them with the rudimentary education she herself had and gave them the most normal life she could, under their horrific circumstances. Over the next 24 years, Elizabeth Fritzl gave birth to 5 more children. 1 more was allowed to remain in the basement with her. 1 died shortly after birth, and the other 3 were taken upstairs to live with Rosemary and Joseph. In order to conceal what he was doing from Rosemary, he staged elaborate discoveries of the children. He often placed them on bushes near the home or sometimes on the doorstep. Each time, the child was swaddled neatly and accompanied with a note allegedly written by Elizabeth claiming that she couldn't take care of the baby and was leaving it with her parents for safekeeping. Shockingly, social services never questioned the appearance of the children and allowed the Fritzls to keep them as their own children. Officials, on the other hand, remained under the impression that Rosemary and Joseph were the baby's grandparents. It is not known for how long Joseph Fritzl intended to keep his daughter captive in his basement. He had gotten away with it for 24 years. And for all the police knew, he was going to continue probably for another 24. However, in 2008, one of the children in the cellar fell ill. Elizabeth begged her father to allow her 19-year-old daughter, Kirsten, to get medical attention. She had fallen rapidly and critically ill, and Elizabeth was beside herself. Grudgingly, Joseph agreed to take her to a hospital. He removed Kirsten from the cellar and called an ambulance, claiming that he had a note from Kirsten's mother explaining her condition. She looked like a ghost. She was seriously ill, her only relative, a mysterious grandfather. The police eventually grew suspicious of Joseph and reopened the investigation into Elizabeth Fritzl's disappearance. They began to read the letters that Elizabeth had supposedly been leaving for the Fritzls, and began to see inconsistencies in them. Police questioned Kirsten and also asked the public for any information on her family. Naturally, no one came forward as there was no family to speak of. Whether Joseph finally felt the pressure or had a change of heart regarding his daughters, but on April 26, 2008, he released Elizabeth from the cellar for the first time in 24 years. She immediately went to the hospital to see her daughter, where hospital staff alerted police to her suspicious arrival. That night, she was taken into custody to be questioned about her daughter's illness and her father's story. After making the police promise that she never had to see her father again, Elizabeth Fritzl told the tale of her 24-year imprisonment. She explained that her father kept her in a basement and that she bore his 7 children. She explained that Joseph was the father of all 7 of them and that Joseph Fritzl would come down during the night, make her watch pornographic films, and then rape her. She explained that he'd been abusing her ever since she was 11. The police arrested Joseph Fritzl that very same night. After the arrest, the children in the cellar were also released and Rosemary Fritzl fled the home. She had allegedly known nothing about the events taking place right under her feet, and Joseph backed up her story. The tenants who had lived in the apartment on the first floor of the Fritzl home also never knew what was happening right beneath them, as Yosef had explained away all the sounds by blaming faulty piping and a noisy heater. Prior to his trial, Yosef confessed to the repeated rapes, claiming that the rape of his daughter was an addiction and the redirection of incestuous feelings he felt towards his own mother. He also claimed to be a loving, attentive father to the children he sired in the basement, bringing them books and stuffed animals, watching videos, and eating dinner with the children just like a family. At the trial, the father admitted guilt on an incest charge but pled innocent to enslavement and to the murder of his child. After he saw Elizabeth's taped testimony, he changed his plea to full guilt, acknowledging that his failure to secure medical care for the newborn may have directly contributed to the death. For his crimes, Fritzl was found guilty on all counts: negligent murder, enslavement, incest, rape, coercion, and false imprisonment. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2009. He has been in solitary confinement in Austria's Kremstein prison since that time. According to Austrian media, he now suffers from dementia and none of his family has visited during his decade behind bars. Elizabeth Fritzl lives under a new identity in a secret Austrian village known only as Village X. The home is under constant CCTV surveillance and police patrol every corner. The family doesn't allow interviews anywhere within their walls and has declined to give any information about themselves. Though she is now in her mid-50s, the last photo taken of her was when she was just 16 years of age. How do you form an intimate relationship after the people who are supposed to protect you have done so many horrible things to you? What do you guys think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.